Hello, class, and welcome to today's lecture on the psychology of language. We're going to explore the complexities of human language, which is arguably the most intricate behavior in the world. Language is what sets us apart from other animals and allows us to communicate our thoughts, our feelings, our ideas with each other. Language involves both the ability to understand spoken and written words, and the ability to create communication in real time when we speak or write. Whether it's spoken language that involves complex cognitive, social, and biological processes, or sign language that involves movements of the hand. Language is an incredible tool that allows us to express ourselves and connect with others. And while we often use language to exchange information, such as giving directions or reporting the news, its uses are far more diverse. Language also allows us to access existing knowledge, draw conclusions, accomplish goals, and understand complex social relationships. So get ready and let's dive into the fascinating world of language. So language and the psychology of language is about how people acquire messages, understand, and communicate with each other. This may be through formal spoken language, but it doesn't need to be. It can be through hand gestures, or through emojis, or tones, or body position, or signal lights on a car, or flags on a ship, or dots and dashes of Morse code. Yeah, you get the picture. Language is something that is diverse, and yet there are some interesting things that go on within this. Now, today, we will look at three primary aspects of language. First, the components of language, and focusing primarily on phonemes, morphemes, and syntax. And next, we will explore the biology and development of language, because there seems to be a golden time for acquiring and developing language. And that time, sadly, is long since past for me. Now, finally, we will look at how experiencing, like growing up in an environment that facilitates bilingualism, can have a profound benefit on cognitive development, and how that helps with brain development. But first, as always, I'd like to begin with a little story. So today I want to tell you a little story about Jeannie Wiley. Now, for those of you that don't know, Jeannie Wiley was a young girl who spent most of her childhood in isolation and abuse. Her story has been widely studied by psychologists, but primarily it's interesting not for its sadness, but because it tests the idea that there's a critical period in language development that takes place. And the question is, could a child reared in utter deprivation and isolation develop language? Could a nurturing environment make up for a horrifying past? And those are some of the questions that we'll delve into as we look at Jeannie's story and try to discover the answer. Now, the early life of Jeannie, from 1957 through to 1970, let's kind of cover that area first. Now, Jeannie's life prior to her discovery was one of utter deprivation. She spent most of her days tied, naked to a potty chair, only able to move her hands and her feet. When she made noise, her father would beat her. The rare times that her father did interact with her, it was to bark or growl. Jeannie Wiley's brother, who was 5 years older than Jeannie, also suffered abuse under their father. Now, Jeannie's story came to light in November 4th, 1970 in Los Angeles, California. A social worker discovered Jeannie at that age, she was 13 years old, after her mother sought out services for her own health. The social worker soon discovered that the girl had been confined to a small room, and an investigation by authorities quickly revealed that the child had spent most of her life in this room, often tied to a potty chair. And it's essential to note that Jeannie's case was one of the first to put the critical period theory to the test. Now, the critical period theory in psychology posits that there is a specific window during childhood when the brain is especially receptive to learning language. And this theory suggests that once this critical period has passed, it becomes much more difficult to acquire language. And Jeannie's isolation until the age of 13 meant that she had missed out on the critical period for language acquisition. Therefore, her case presented an opportunity to study whether it is possible for Jeannie to develop language after missing this critical period. With so much interest in her case, the question became, what should be done to help Jeannie? And so a team of psychologists and language experts began the process of rehabilitating Jeannie. The National Institute of Mental Health provided funding for scientific research on Jeannie's case, and psychologist David Rigler was part of the Jeannie team. And he goes on and explains the process with a little quote here. Quote, "I think everybody who came in contact with her was attracted to her. She had a quality about her connecting with people, which developed more and more, but was present really from the start. She had a way of reaching out without saying anything, but just somehow by the kind of look in her eyes, and people wanted to do things for her," unquote. Now, Jeannie's rehabilitation team also included graduate school Susan Curtis and psychologist James Kent. Upon her initial arrival at UCLA, Jeannie weighed about 59 pounds and moved in a strange bunny walk. She often would squat and was unable to straighten her arms and her legs. She was silent, incontinent, and unable to chew. She initially seemed only able to recognize her own name and the word sorry. After assessing Jeannie's emotional and cognitive abilities, Kent described her as the most profoundly damaged child I've ever seen. Jeannie's life is a wasteland, he described it as. Her silence and inability to use language made it difficult to assess her mental abilities, understandably. But on tests, she scored about the level of a 1-year-old. Soon, she began to make rapid progress in specific areas, quickly learning how to use the toilet and how to dress herself. And over the next few months, she began to experience more developmental progress, but remained poor in areas such as language. The impact on language development is something that is really highlighted by Jeannie's case. And because Jeannie's case was a unique opportunity to study the relationship between language and socialization. Prior to her discovery, researchers believed that there was a critical period during which language had to be acquired in order to develop properly. However, Jeannie's case challenged this theory. At the time of her discovery, remember, Jeannie was 13 years old and hadn't acquired language. And this was surprising since the critical period of language was thought to end at age 5. However, despite being deprived of language, Jeannie was able to learn some words and phrases, although she never fully developed normal language skills. And so researchers studying Jeannie discovered that language development is more complex than originally thought. It is not simply a matter of being exposed to language during the critical period. Instead, language development is influenced by a range of factors, including things like socialization and environment and cognitive abilities. Now, in Jeannie's case, her severe deprivation and isolation had a significant impact on her language ability and development. Her inability to learn language may have been due to a lack of exposure, but it was also likely affected by these other factors, such as her cognitive and emotional development. Now, it is clear from her case that language acquisition is not simply a matter of learning vocabulary and grammar, but it is instead a complex process that is influenced by these whole range of factors. Now, Jeannie's case also raises a number of ethical considerations. Her treatment by her parents was clearly abusive, and their actions had a profound impact on her life. However, some researchers involved in her case were criticized for their methods and for their focus on studying her rather than providing her with the care and support that she needed. There were also concerns about the long-term impact of the research on Jeannie's life. While the research helped to advance our understanding of language and socialization, it is still important to consider the impact that the research had on Jeannie's personal well-being. Now, despite the ethical implications, what we have found here is that language acquisition is indeed a difficult and complex process. So let's go on now and explore a little bit of language and the elements of language, the components of language. Language can be conceptualized in terms of sounds and meaning and the environmental factors that help us understand it. And phonemes are the elementary sounds of our language. Morphemes are the smallest units of meaning in a language. And syntax is the set of grammatical rules that control how words are put together. And contextual information is the elements of communication that are not part of the content of language, but that help us understand its meaning. So, I now want to dive in a little deeper into these areas and start off with phonemes. So, language is a fundamental aspect of human communication, and it's essential for the organization and the expression of our thoughts and emotions and ideas. And psychologists have been interested in understanding the processes and mechanisms that underlie language production and comprehension. And the study of language encompasses all of these several components, including phonology and syntax and semantics and pragmatics. Now, you don't need to kind of remember these names, but I do want to kind of throw out a few terms here. So, like, for example, phonology is the study of the sound system of language, and it deals with the basic units of sound that are used in language. And so phonemes are the smallest units of sound that make a meaningful difference in a language. So in other words, you can change a phoneme in a word, you change the meaning of that word. For example, the word bit and pit have the same letters, but they have different meanings because of the different phonemes that are used in each. The word bit has 3 phonemes, b, I, t. And the word pit also has 3, p, I, t. Now, phonemes are produced by the positions and movements of the vocal tract, which include, movement of your lips and your teeth and your tongue and your vocal cords and your throat. So in spoken language, phonemes are produced by varying the positions and movements of these articulators. In sign language, phonemes are defined by the shapes and movements of the hands. Now, one interesting fact about phonemes is that there are hundreds of unique phonemes that can be made by human speakers, but most languages only use a small subset of these possibilities. For example, English contains 45 phonemes, whereas other languages have as few as 15 and others more than 60. So for example, the Hawaiian language contains only about a dozen phonemes, including 5 vowels, A, E, I, O, and U, and 7 consonants, H, K, L, M, and P, and W. Now, another important aspect of phonemes is that they are treated as categories of sound that are similar to each other within a language. This means that the speaker of different languages can hear the difference between some phonemes but not others. And this is known as categorical perception of speech sounds. So, like for example, English speakers can differentiate the R phoneme from the I phoneme, or the L phoneme, and thus rake and lake are heard as different words. In Japanese, however, R and L are the same phoneme, and thus speakers of the language of Japanese cannot tell the difference between the word rake and the word lake. And this difference in phoneme perception is due to the fact that these phonemes are categorized differently in each language. So to demonstrate this difference in perception, just try something here. Say the words cool and keep out loud. Okay, cool and keep. Can you hear the difference between the two K sounds? To English speakers, they both sound the same. But to speakers of Arabic, these represent two different phonemes. And this is an excellent example of how our native language influences the way we perceive and categorize sounds. So in conclusion, phonemes are the smallest units of sound that make a meaningful difference in a language. They are produced by the movements and positions of the vocal tract, and they are treated as categories of sounds within a language. The perception of phonemes can vary between different languages due to the differences of categorization. So understanding phonemes is crucial for understanding how language is produced and comprehended. And it can shed light on the fundamental processes of human communication. Now, let's move on and explore morphemes and syntax. So morphemes are the smallest units of meaning in a language. They are strings of one or more phonemes that make up words. So morphemes, such as one-letter words like I and a, are also phonemes. But most morphemes are made up of a combination of phonemes. Morphemes can also be prefixes and suffixes used to modify other words. For example, the syllable re, as in rewrite or repay, means to do again. And the suffix est, as in happiest or coolest, means to the maximum. Then there's syntax. Syntax, on the other hand, is a set of rules of a language by which we construct sentences. Each language has a different syntax. The syntax of English requires that each sentence have a noun and a verb. each of which may be modified by adjectives and adverbs. Some syntaxes make use of the order in which words appear, while others do not. For example, in English, the man bites the dog is different from the dog bites the man. In German, however, only the article endings before the noun really matter. Der Hund beißt den Mann means the dog bites the man, but so does den Mann beißt der Hund. So, it's important to note that words do not possess fixed meanings and change their interpretation as a function of the context in which they are spoken. So we use contextual information, the information surrounding language, to help us interpret it. And so this becomes very important. So examples of contextual information include the knowledge that we have and that we know the other people have, and nonverbal expressions such as facial expressions, posture, gestures, and tone of voice. So misunderstandings can easily arise if people aren't attentive to contextual information, or if some of it is missing, such as it may be in newspaper headlines or in text messages. So in summary, while phonemes are the smallest unit of sound in language, morphemes are the smallest units of meaning. And syntax is the set of rules of a language by which we construct sentences. And the interpretation of words changes as a function of the context in which they are spoken. So, we're going to pause there and let you take a little bit of a break, and we'll come back and explore other areas of language, including the biology and development of language, as well as the issues of bilingualism and how that impacts upon cognitive development. Hope you enjoyed the lecture thus far, and I'll see you in a little while. You take care. Goodbye.